Do we need a central bank digital currency? Is the climate crisis just a way for the government to raise more taxes? And if Christians were actually pro-life, would the foster care system still be necessary? We'll talk about all of these takes and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we gather good takes and bad takes from all across the internet, and we expound upon what makes them good or bad. My name is Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie, and before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. You can find us at Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram, and on Twitter at Good Bad Take Pod, and YouTube as well at Good Bad Take Pod. Without further ado, let's get into some of these takes. The first one we've got is a Twitter thread. First is an article by Reuters, which says Florida to allow death penalty with an 8-4 jury vote instead of unanimously. And then Scott Monty comments or replies, so pro-life? What do you think?
So there's two things. The main post we're critiquing here is Scott Monty being sort of that sarcastic, like, so pro-life, like, wow, aren't you pro-life in allowing this? The first, before we get into that obvious one, I want to give a real big, like, thumbs down to Reuters here. When I opened the article and read, I still don't like the move, but Florida is basically allowing the jury to decide whether or not the death penalty could be applied. So you still need a unanimous decision to give the death penalty if someone is considered guilty, but basically the death penalty can be considered on an 8-4 vote. So if 8 jurors think, if this person is guilty, the death penalty should apply here, they can vote that. Now it's 8-4, but the jury still has to unanimously decide whether or not someone is guilty. So the article makes it sound like you just need an 8-4 vote on the jury, and then you send someone off to the gallows. No, you still need a 12-0 decision for someone to get the death penalty. But now the sentencing, instead of prison for life, you can say on an 8-4 vote, it can say this is in fact worthy of the death penalty. Now, I'm not a big fan of the death penalty to begin with, so I don't like that they're making it easier to access the state, being able to guillotine people here. But the thing that frustrates me about Scott Monty's take, and I know we've had ones like this before, but it just gets me every time, is they take a specific terminology and they say, wow, you're so pro-life, and they apply it to a completely different issue with having zero idea of what the point of either the pro-life position or the pro-death penalty position is here. So if you understand why someone would be pro-death penalty, it would be because the crime committed is so heinous, it is a threat to other people's life, and they have deprived lives. Therefore, taking that person's life out of the equation of humanity makes the rest of the lives safer. So in that sense, yeah, death penalty could be, from a proponent's position, argued to be pro-life. But this person, of course, is trying to make it so, like, oh, you support one aspect of death, therefore you can't call yourself this position, which has nothing to do with the death penalty. It has to do with abortion and whether or not that is a justified procedure or not.
Yeah, it's a total semantic game. And
Yes.
I was trying to think of a like example, and it's like someone, you're saying like, hey, I don't support someone having to run for their life, being chased by a bunch of zombies and having to run for their life. And then someone going, so you're anti-exercise then?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not exactly what I'm going for. I'm making a statement about something else. And yeah, being able to run and all that stuff, like exercise is a part of that. The death penalty makes someone die and they're not alive anymore. So in that sense, yes, you're semantically correct. But it's just it's so immature, I guess. I don't really know Scott Monty, but it's just like this. One, it doesn't really actually make any point. 2, it doesn't make much sense. And 3, it just stirs up like, oh, he dunked on him. But no, you didn't actually dunk on him. Like, you just kind of made a dumb point. That's all.
Yeah, no matter, I'm trying to think about it, but from any of the angles, this, and like I said, I am not pro death penalty. I don't like that they are lowering this threshold, but the argument I would make isn't, oh my gosh, you call yourself pro-life and yet you support the death penalty. That's not the issue here. It's the same vein as for instance, my if I object to stronger police protections, it's like, oh, what, you don't want security and safety? It's like, no, I want security and safety. I don't think the state is the best mechanism for that. And so, my death penalty opposition, I'm not going to all these people who are pro death penalty saying, wow, I thought you guys called yourself pro-life, because that's from their point of view, they are being pro-life. They are protecting lives with that. They would view it as the same way that, having a firearm on your person for self-defense is a pro-life action, even though that can involve the taking of someone else's life, because using your firearm in self-defense preserves other lives. That's kind of how they're treating this. So trying to approach it from the hypocrite angle doesn't work. And then, of course, you're also putting on that fake standard where you can't call yourself pro-life unless you agree to this laundry list of other policies that have nothing to do with being pro-life. Yeah. And so it's just a cheap shot. And I don't know, it doesn't work on the critique in terms of he's trying to call it hypocrisy, and I don't see this as hypocrisy. And then he's also just playing the cheap semantic game of trying to loop in the unrelated issue and trying to claim the ground that you can't be both, which it's quite obvious you can if you want to argue that position. We try not to straw man here, and that's what this is. This is just the ultimate straw man.
Yeah, there's so many better arguments too. If you don't, it's clear that Scott Monty doesn't actually have an informed opinion on either side of this, debate. It's more just like, oh, I just want to make DeSantis or Florida or whoever look like a hypocrite. So I'm going to say, I know that they're pro-life in terms of like pro-babies, babies being able to be born without being killed. And they're going to kill someone, so it's just like, it's just a leveraging, kind of like we would talk about in cringe posts. Like there's no principle that undergirds this. It's all just like, oh, I just want to have power and I want to be able to dunk on your face. But he doesn't do it particularly well because it's not a good argument. If you, like, you and I have probably very similar opinions on the death penalty. Like I just don't trust the state. I mean, I don't trust the state with my money. Why the heck would I trust them with the ability to, declare life or death for someone?
Right.
There's a lot better arguments to be made, but those arguments are, I think, pretty obvious to make too. But Scott doesn't make them, so that just means he's just trying to score some points with his audience.
Yeah, and if he wanted to have a wry, pithy comment, he could have said something like, "Wow, so small government," something like that, because really, that's a better critique. Or, "Wow, big government sucks, huh?" Or you could make the pithy remark if you want to earn the points, but there's just so many better points to be made about this.
Yeah.
Because being pro-life, it doesn't really equate very well in this situation.
Yeah. Moving to our next one. We've got an article by a Twitter user, or it's a picture, and they're commenting on it saying China's CBDC is linked to your digital ID. The government can control exactly how you spend your money. Imagine you want to buy a Coke, but the machine disapproves. Oh, you want a Coke? Sorry, you've already hit your carbon limit for the month. Drink water instead. And Ward Davidson quote retweets this saying, terrifying example of why we don't need a central bank digital currency. Sound money is not a Chinese-style CBDC that governs our lives. What do you think?
So yeah, this is Warren Davison's take here is great. The video that's attached shows these vending machines that are scanning citizens in China's face because, for those of you who aren't aware, China currently already has a social credit system where everyone's actions and employment and monetary status is tied in with this social credit that the government controls and bars you from certain things if it's too low, or if you have to have certain amount in order to do certain activities. So now this central bank digital currency, the CBDC, is now being linked with that as well. And so this person goes up to this vending machine, it scans her face, and she can pay for what she wants without having to even, scan her phone or her credit card, nothing. And the video, she's like, wow, that's so amazing. And the first take here is saying, it's like, wow, like imagine you want to buy a Coke, but the machine disapproves because your credit's too low or whatever. Don't like that. And I think what Warren Davidson hits on here is, sound money isn't a Chinese style CBDC that governs our lives. And I think when he's talking about sound money, that is the key takeaway here, because beyond just the scary realities of like, oh, you have to abide by whatever social agenda the government wants to control. That's scary. That's definitely terrifying, like the first example. But the idea of sound money, to me, that is what's even more terrifying. The idea that not only does the government directly control all of your assets, but now there's almost no threshold to prevent them from printing more money. But with a digital currency, the paper trail literally vanishes, right? There's not even a paper trail, and the access for them to forge or print, digitally all kinds of currency, manipulate it, control it, and cover their tracks is even more powerful than before, which is, I think, a really, really terrifying thought.
Yeah, I was listening to Ron Paul on the Tim Cast podcast last week, and he was talking about sound money and how money is supposed to be a unit of measurement. We're supposed to be able to take it, weigh it, look at it, quantify it in some way. And that is the definition of sound money. Because if you think of money as like the building block of society, and let's just put in the analogy of you're building a house and it's the unit of measurement is inches or whatever. So you have X amount of inches of wood that you're going to be using. But as you build this thing up, you start changing the unit of measurement, and suddenly you have to account for those unit of measurements being there or not being there. When it comes time to connect certain parts of the house, like it's not going to line up, right? Because there is no, like you're saying, there's no paper trail. Certain calculations that were made earlier in the building process are not going to be, work out later because they're not based off of the same thing. So, sound money, is super, super important. The appeal of, a central bank digital currency for people is it's that like, oh, we can avoid stuff like the Silicon Valley Bank issue, or oh, you're no matter where you go, you're going to have this convenience of being able to get your face scanned and all this stuff. uh but those are just tricks to get you into their machine to make you controlled. I've talked about my experience in Portugal, with the rental car that we had, where they have these regulations where you have to use this diesel exhaust fluid. And if you don't have any of that in your car, you're not able to drive it. It has no function on whether you are actually, the function of the car. It doesn't make it go faster. It doesn't make it, work better. It's just purely an environmental regulation. But if you don't have it in your car literally won't turn on. And so you could be in the middle of nowhere and having an emergency, and because you don't have this DEF fluid, you can't drive your car. And so stuff like that, is kind of isolated in those moments, because it's like, oh, well, I can just go buy some fluid, even if I don't necessarily adhere to this environmental regulation. But when they put it into the actual currency itself, every single type of transaction, any sort of bartering, any sort of exchange is now regulated, and they can really, really control your life, which is really terrifying, and it's why we should really resist this push.
Absolutely. And you think about it kind of like what we're talking about towards the end there. It really is that the government owns your money. It owns every aspect of your ability to trade. As of now, you think about how overwhelming the government's reach really is. And most people in their day-to-day lives, they don't think about it. But if you have an item, you made this item yourself. You went out into the woods, you gathered the resources, you came home, you built it into something that is useful and serves a purpose, and then you sold that to someone. The government wants to know about that. Like, think about how actually insane that is when you remove yourself just from the normality of like paying taxes. Oh yeah, once a year we do this thing, blah. Like, just think about how crazy that is. You did something completely on your own. You made a voluntary arrangement and agreement with someone, and they gave you a value, a token, a value, and you exchange that. The government's like, yeah, it's our business not only to know about that, but to take a cut of that. That is crazy insane. But now it's a step further, right? Because now they're not only saying, hey, when you do that, you owe us. We also own every single part of the transaction, because now even the token that just represents the value that we already get a cut of and want to know about, we now literally can control that and lock that. We can prevent you from giving that. We can't just go after you retroactively and penalize you if we don't like something. We can't just contrive a reason. We can literally lock you out of being able
Mhm.
to do that for any purpose. And people talk about, oh, the first time they get a paycheck, they see their taxes taken out. They're like, wow, who owns my money, me or the government? When you buy a house and you pay it off and then they're still taking real estate taxes, you're like, am I just renting my own property? What is this? And now it's like, now you're also just renting your own currency. You're also just renting your own money. And that's just a terrifying reality that should not be embraced.
Did you ever watch Minority Report?
Yes.
Yeah, so this reminds me, I mean, even down to the facial scanning thing, but like all transactions are done by them like reading the iris of a
Yep.
person's eye. And so there's this whole thing where the guy that's kind of on the run, Tom Cruise, needs to basically get his eyes replaced because now that they've identified like who he is and all this stuff, like if he goes into public or anything like that, they're going to read his iris and they're going to be able to catch him and things like that. That's what this opens it up to, right? It seems as innocuous as like, oh well, we'll just have better control and it's going to lead to a more stable and safe society, to quote the Emperor from Star Wars. But underneath all of it is really sinister, and it's that Minority Report kind of society where they have total and utter control over everything that you do, and if you don't adhere to what they want you to do, they can literally starve you to death if they decide to.
And I think you're totally right before where they lure you in with the small bait. But it's like really when you think about it, think about how silly it is that the minor conveniences of like maybe a face scan or just having your bank access digitally available handily because it's a digital currency or whatever. It's like not only is that such a minor benefit for this extreme payoff, but also the private markets is there way before
Yep.
the government has. I mean, like Cash App and Venmo and NFC scanning. All of these things are the majority of what the user convenience would be for a digital currency. And the private market's been there for years at this point, and the government's slowly trying to catch up. And God forbid they do, because they will have unprecedented control. But even it's like even the minor benefits they want to offer you, the private market does better anyway.
Yeah.
And so
and,
yeah.
and they have incentive to keep you living and thriving
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah,
So
exactly.
all right, next one. We've got Sal the agorist, and he tweets out a picture. And it goes 1960s, there was a prediction that the oil would be gone in 10 years. 1970s, that another ice age would happen in 10 years. 1980s, the acid rain will destroy all crops in 10 years. The 90s, the ozone layer will be gone by 2000. And in 2000, there was a prediction the ice caps will be gone in 10 years. None happened, but all resulted in more taxes. Are you awake yet? Is this a good take, Donnie?
It's a great take because it highlights. I feel like this picture should appeal, at least speak to, if not appeal to the broadest range of people who have opinions on any kind of climate change, global warming, environmentalism, whatever your perspective is. There's something to take away from this. So let's assume for the moment that climate change is real. Climate change is 100% man-made, and climate change will have devastating effects if we don't do something about it. Okay? Recognize still, even if all of those things are true and there are actual tangible effects happening, that these dire predictions have been wrong, that the fatalism that has driven policy decision making because of this has literally caused disruptions and bankruptcies and lower quality of life for people, and none of these predictions have come true. So even if you think humans have a responsibility to change things, the only outcome from all of this panic is more control from the government, which is bad at affecting these changes. And when it does affect changes, it usually imposes the worst parts of the changes, where it's like the taxes going up, the costs being higher, and then very little actual effective change, such as carbon emissions going down or wildlife being preserved. All of those effects, the trade-off is so poor. You look at the budget for the environmental and like sort of allocation of funds in the Washington state proposed budget. Literally half of the funding goes to paying other departments and other governments and paying themselves, not actually applying any environmental impact whatsoever to help people. So as the all resulting in more taxes is the correct apt approach, and more taxes generally means the rich are getting richer, but not the entrepreneurial rich, just the government worker rich, and they're taking from middle and poor classes just as much as the rich for these kind of things.
Yeah, the big difference between a private enterprise and the public, department is that a private enterprise says, "Hey, there's a need in the market. Let me create a few solutions and see which one sticks and solves that need, and along the way I'll make money." Whereas a public department goes to you and says, "Hey, vote for this need because it's real. We believe this need is here and you'll give us money if this need exists." So they quite literally have to invent needs that probably don't exist, that have not been validated, in order to get revenue from you. That's their primary marketing strategy. Whereas, like I was saying, a private business goes and tries to solve problems. And the proof of whether they have solved that problem or not is whether people will actually pay for it and decide to pay for it, because it has a net benefit for them. So you can kind of see clearly this trend, right? Like they have to manufacture crises. They have to manufacture, oh, there's a need for this or need for that. And this is how they make sure they fund their departments. And then on top of that, there is no incentive for them to actually solve what the need or problem that they are claiming exists. Because if they did, then they would have no more money to begin with, right? You would go and say, oh, well, you've solved it. The whole point of you existing was for you to solve that. There's no more value for you to add after it's solved. So you don't get more budget. And sorry, you actually got to go create real value someplace else. So that's why climate change is literally the perfect thing, because it's global, it's unpredictable. There is no way to actually quantify on either side what is going on, and it's like I was saying, it's such a big crisis that you can say, oh, we're saving the world, right? Like you can kind of appeal to that. You can also appeal to the gap in people's souls that is not filled with a purpose, right? Like I have this buddy of mine who's he just loves the climate stuff, convinced he needs to save the world. It's like, man, like you'd probably do better saving the world if you just settle down, had a family, and raise really good kids, right? But most people don't have a really big gap in their souls, and they are not actually looking for that, and so they know they have to fill it, right? And so they fill it with this self-grandizing thing of like, we're going to save the world by driving an electric vehicle or things like that. And I don't know, maybe you listened to the Dave Smith episode where they had Anna Kasparian going through with the electric vehicles.
No.
You haven't listened? It's pretty funny, man. So Anna Kasparian's from the Young Turks,
Yeah.
and she's awful for the most part, but she basically, like, because of the EV regulations in California, she's now like, oh crap, like my homeowners association is forcing us all to pay for electrical chargers and all the infrastructure for that. And like, I'm not gonna be able to use my gas car. She was just like hating on it. She's like, it's such a big inconvenience and it costs all this money and we're gonna go into debt to have to do this. It's like, yeah, lady, like you're so rich, you are so privileged. And yeah, it's really annoying. Like this global issue that you're talking about that you have to do that is no more important. Like you're whining about it when it's a little inconvenience. Now think about, the poor middle class that can't afford to pay for a $15,000 charger and a $40,000 vehicle. You're literally ruining their lives with this stuff. And what's crazy is she like kind of slips in it in the segment, because she's just like, yeah, and like we're doing all this and we're not even sure if it's going to work. It's like, you're totally right. You're not sure if it's going to work. So maybe we should just leave it up to the private market to innovate. And, the benefit of the private market driving things is they want to become more efficient, right? Like carbon reduction is simultaneously, most of the time goes with a cost reduction, right? When it's done properly and done correctly. So businesses do want to save energy. They do want to make their footprint smaller because it's going to save them costs. It goes hand in hand. But when you introduce all these different types of regulations and one size fits all, you actually reduce their ability to be able to get to a solution that does work. So therefore actually hindering what your efforts are. But that's, like I was saying, if the government actually wanted to solve something, they'd be out of a job.
Yeah, wow. There's so much, so much good to take out of that. Um, her electric vehicle example is great, and let's pair that because California has a law, so does Washington State, and Washington State also has government imposed rules that their government vehicles need to be hitting certain benchmarks for which ones are hybrid electric. They have not even hit 50% of their target. Less than half of the new vehicles they bought when they started this mandate have been electric vehicles, the Washington State government. And the reason is because they don't either or and sometimes they don't believe the nonsense they're spewing, and or the needs that they have to do the job that they're supposed to do with these vehicles. Electric doesn't fit. It just doesn't work. And so they recognize, oh, there is a reality factor here in that we have to get X job done as a department for whatever reason. We need a vehicle that fits that need. And if they really actually believed all this stuff, they probably would think, well, there's got to be a way to work with this with an electric vehicle. But that's not how they operate. Another great example is how this impacts people is like, you're probably somewhat familiar because you have family that you would access via the ferry, but the Washington State ferry system, they have to replace their ferries every I don't know, I think the average lifespan is something like 37 years, but usually they last about 50 years a piece or something like that. And obviously when you have a contract for one of those things, it takes time, and it takes a long time to buy and build these things. So they had this plan they put in place that was supposed to help them keep ahead of schedule so you wouldn't have service interruption and delays. Well, COVID happened and it shut a bunch of things down. They got way far behind. And then Governor Inslee here put an executive order that said every new ferry has to have hybrid or fully electric schematics. And so that just drove costs way high. And we're so set so far back, we're going to be way over budget on that. And what will inevitably happen is that taxes will go up and service of the ferries will go down because there will be fewer ferries readily available. There will be fewer ferries that are able to service the longer distances because some of the ferry pricing within the budgets that they have aren't long enough to make some of the trips that the current ferries service. So your availability of the trips goes down and your payment goes up. So that is everywhere the government sticks its hand with these environmental regulations is costs go up and service and results go down. It's absolutely infuriating. It's absolutely terrifying. And terrifying that these people are in control and have the ability to do that. And they have the total scope to wreck someone's life over that. So I love that example of Anna Kasparian because even she can see how awful it is. And yeah, wow.
That's a bummer about the ferries. I mean, the ferries during COVID, they're just run so poorly, but people just quit basically, or they fired a bunch of folks due to the vaccine mandates. So ferries in Washington State are kind of a bottleneck for transit, and they would sometimes cancel ferries 10 minutes before the ferry was scheduled to leave, and all sorts of stuff. So it's just terrible, and I can only imagine it will get worse with that electrical stuff going on.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Moving on to our next one. We've got Ruth M. Div, or Ruth Schmidt. She's like a theologian, progressive theologian lady on Twitter. And she tweets out, if conservative Christians were actually pro-life, the foster care system wouldn't be necessary. As Christians, we should just as fervently seek to care for kids who are alive if we claim to be pro-life. It's too easy to just be loud about babies who haven't been born. Kids get stuck in the foster system, and letting that happen is not pro-life. What do you think?
Okay, exact same thing as before, where you're taking this, unless you buy all these other policies, you can't, think about how crazy this is. Okay, right? In the political world, in the political realities are that you need short phrases, you need short slogans to get people on board, to rally people towards a movement. And as somewhat of someone who likes to dive into things a little bit more in depth, that's positively frustrating, but I understand the need for it. So that's why the anti-abortion, anti-killing babies movement is called the pro-life movement. But when we use this shorthand, it then opens itself up for people like this to come in and say, actually, you're not pro-life unless, and it's like, look, how about this? How about let's have it your way. Rather than saying I'm pro-life, I'm going to say I'm against murdering babies in the womb. Is that better? Is that a better name? Because that's the position that a pro-life person has. Now, of course, we're going to refute the actual claims here too, and I'll let you dunk that basketball in the hoop. But it's just so stupid because, again, it's that bait and switch of saying, look, pro-life means something in the political context. You know it. Everyone knows it. Pretending like you're ignorant and it's just this sort of colloquialism that has a broader meaning than it does. That's just a bait and switch. You're not actually addressing the point. It's like, okay, my political position is don't kill babies in the womb. And in order to believe that you shouldn't kill babies in the womb, I actually don't have to believe that we adopt from the foster system. Now, I do think those beliefs go hand in hand. I do think Christians have a responsibility to that. But purely speaking, an agnostic person, an atheistic person can be pro-life. They can say, hey, murdering babies in a womb is wrong, and also think, but there's no ethical obligation to take care of kids in the foster system. You can have that. You'd have to have a different worldview than most people have, but the strict political issue of being pro-life has nothing to do with the foster system, strictly speaking. But of course, her other contentions here are wrong.
Yeah, she obviously, I don't personally know too much about the foster system, but I do know a lot more than Ruth does, in that the foster care system, the main point of it is to reunite kids with parents that when the kids are either born or at some point during, their stay with their parents, the parents become incapable of caring for them, right? Because they got addicted to drugs, or maybe there was an abusive situation, or maybe a medical situation arose. And the whole point of the foster care system is for kids to be removed from that environment for a temporary amount of time, the parents to be get put on some sort of plan, and then reunited with their families, as we should all want to have happen, right? That's the best place for a kid to be, is with a healthy parent. And this is evidence is borne out by the fact that I think it's on 50 or 60% of the kids that enter the foster care system are reunited with their parents. That's not a great statistic, but that's over half. And then on top of that, somewhere between 25 to 40% will be adopted, right? And the thing that Ruth misses from this is that basically all of those adoptions that occur out of the foster care system are done by Christians. Christians are something like 5 times more, adopt five at a rate 5 times more than non-Christians do. And that's not to say that Christians can't be doing better, right? But I think if you look at the fruit of Christians, as well as the fact that the entire concept of a foster care system was created by Christians, or the first orphanages were created by Christians in the 4th century AD in Rome, as well as the founder of the modern foster care system in the 1800s was a Christian as well, and did it out of that verse in the Bible that talks about how we should care for orphans and widows. So the Christian lifestyle, the Christian Christians don't always embody that, but I think there's a correlation between having a Christian belief and there being a way higher chance of you adopting a kid, and so you can hold both of those beliefs at the same time, like you were saying. And also, I think Christians are evidence that they are pro-life across the spectrum, right? You'd have to have some crazy, if Christians were even the same, adopted at the same rate, you still couldn't claim that, they're not pro-life, because it's like, well, they're adopting the same way, or more than someone who is not pro-life. So yeah, you'd have to actually have a differential where Christians choose to actively not adopt or advocate against adoption to make this point that she's trying to. She obviously, again, doesn't understand what the foster care system is. Not to mention, that Christians also adopt not just in the United States, but adopt kids from overseas that are not able to be adopted. There's a family in my hometown adopted 8 kids from China that all had various types of developmental issues. Kids that are probably going to be with them until the kid either dies or the parents die, right? Because they're just not going to be able to live on their own. So there's unending examples just like that. And the fact of the matter is that only the Christian morality framework dictates that. You don't really get that from other. I mean, maybe a little bit from some other religions, but the Christian religion is most closely tied to that type of mindset.
Yeah, there's so many things to say about this. I mean, the crazy thing too is I'm pretty sure most people who are in some, a religious community of some kind, whether that's church or they have, friends or family or coworkers who are religious, they probably all have stories of at least one, if not more, families that they know that have adopted, that have been directly a part of the foster care system. In fact, one of my coworkers, he and his wife have been adopting from the foster care system and taking care of kids for literally decades. And they cycle them in, and then as the foster care will reach out, they basically always said yes, and they stay with them for years, and basically grow up as their kids, and part of the reason why that is what something that this the shifting goalpost that this person says is, if you want to be pro-life, then you have to support this other good thing in this system, that, and then you're pro-life. But what I would say is, why are you only shifting the goalpost there? Because frankly, in order to have a foster system be able to give kids to families, you actually need a stable society, one that values family, one that values
Yep.
patience, one that values generosity, one that values caring for others who are disadvantaged. So really, when you think about it, you can't be a pro foster system without being pro Christian, right? Because being pro Christian gives your society the basis to have a family union, gives you the basis to have, the tenets of morality, of generosity, so there's so many ways you can shift the goalpost here, but that's probably one of the reasons why the foster care system is overwhelmingly reliant on Christians is because Christian families tend to have stable households that are willing to sacrifice in order to promote human living. So yes, absolutely, Christians should be even more engaged in the foster system, and making the foster system the need for it to be obsolete. Definitely, absolutely. But we also think that you should, have a society that doesn't leave kids in a foster care system to begin with. So really, you can't be pro foster care adoption unless you're pro Christian, according, if we're going to play by these rules, which is a
That's a
stupid
great
standard,
point.
of course.
That's a
But
great point.
but yeah,
It's a bummer. I would tell you to go comment on it, but she turned off all replies. So
naturally. Well, and then the other thing I just want to highlight, because before I forget, because it irks me, is if conservative Christians were actually pro life, it wouldn't be necessary. Like, why is this also just on conservative Christians? Like, why shouldn't you also say, like, if liberals were actually caring, the foster system wouldn't be
yeah,
necessary? Why is the onus only on the conservative Christians who claim to be pro life when they are the ones overwhelmingly adopting? The claim here is implicitly saying it's the fault of conservative Christians because they don't want to murder babies. Um, but it's like, why is that only on them? Why is it not also on the left? And moreover, you're also saying that conservative Christians aren't pro-life because of this, which is also just a false claim.
yeah. My favorite reply to it was, if socially progressive liberals were as generous with their own money as they are with others, then there would be no need for a foster care system.
Exactly.
Pretty good. Pretty good. All right, moving on to our last one. We've got Luke
Oh,
Skywalker, aka Mark Hamill. And he's tweeting out a video where he did some conversations with some drone operators, and there's a picture of two operators with their Ukrainian flag behind them, and then a picture with a Ukrainian flag and an Azov battalion flag behind them. And he tweets out, "It was a pleasure meeting with the brave Ukrainian drone operators. We talked about the challenges they face on a daily basis. They also wanted to talk about Wookiees and farm boys and droids. Oh my. Show your support here." And he links to a place to donate to the drone operators. And then someone replies to Mark and writes, "Hey Mark, I'm a big fan of yours, and it's really terrifying you to see. It's really terrifying to see you not acknowledging the very obvious flag in this video. I understand if you didn't recognize it, the Azov Battalion flag. I know lots of people might not have, but it's been pointed out to you a lot, and your silence is really painful." And Mark replies, "I have no idea what that flag signifies. My support is simply for Ukraine over the Russian invasion, period." What do you think, Donnie?
Oh, this is such a bad take from Mark. It's like he doesn't realize how badly he's owned himself. This is a total self-own. I have no idea what that flag signifies. Okay. One, it's been pointed out to you many times. Two, you clearly know, but you also have no idea. That's just the takeaway here. You have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea whose water you're carrying. You have no idea what you're actually getting into. At best, you're ignoring the fact that you know it's a Nazi battalion, and at worst, you're willfully ignorant, just blindly supporting some cause because it's big and important. Think about the double standard of hypocrisy. How in the Rage Against the War Machine, someone had a Russian flag flying to support the citizens of Russia who are also suffering, and everyone jumped on that and said, "This is awful, this is horrible." But then Mark's just here with an Azov battalion, and he's like, "Well, I have no idea what that means." It's like, would you think he would have been okay if there had been a Russian flag in the background, even though that signifies support for the Russian citizens? Probably not. It's a total silly double standard. It's a total self own here, and Mark should feel really embarrassed for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's people talk about the Iraq War or they talk about Vietnam. Like, man, it's just all these people. How did we go in there and cause all this destruction and all this loss of life on both our side and the other side? And like, we just need to be really informed and stuff. And then these same people, I mean, I don't exactly know what Mark Hamill's opinion was back then, but a lot of people that have the Ukrainian flag, were very much, because it was a war started by a Republican, and a terrible war at that, but they were against it. And then here they are, doing the same dumb thing that the Republicans did in 2003 when we invaded Iraq, which is just like blindly, saying like, well, we're there to fight for our freedom. And then Mark Hamill's like, well, we're just supporting Ukraine over Russia's invasion. It's like, yeah, man, like, like, don't you understand how, like, the Azov Battalion flag and the Azov Battalion's existence is kind of key to the entire, situation that's going over there? Like, if you don't know what that is, you don't really have any leg to stand on to offer an opinion about it. If you don't have any leg to offer an opinion, you probably shouldn't be publicly, supporting it if you can't defend yourself and you can't defend that position. So, like all these people, like it's the weirdest thing, man. I mean, we've talked about it before, but the history started on 9/11, and Eastern, Europe and Eastern, and Russia's history started on, February whatever 2022 when they invaded. It's like, man, there's a history going all the way back to 2014 and beyond. And that Azov Battalion flag, I mean, it's kind of key to understand what that is for you to actually have an opinion on what's happening there. And especially these people, I actually really sympathize with the, like, I know we have a lot of you and I went to school with a lot of Ukrainians, and I know a lot of them personally, and there's a pretty big Ukrainian Eastern Orthodox community in Washington State that I'm friends with a lot. And I actually feel for those people, obviously, right? Like, they're getting blown up. A lot of their friends and family are being killed, had to flee, lost a lot of possessions and life's work over there. But if you actually care about them, don't you want the fighting to stop? Don't you want there to be peace in the area? And yes, Russia's invading, but shouldn't you also be asking yourself, what would it take to get peace in this region? And if you ask yourself that, and you kind of go back feel along the lines of history all the way back to 2014 and beyond, you start realizing that we've basically been amping up Ukraine to go fight Russia and provoking Russia. And then we kind of just abandon Ukraine, in the middle of all this stuff to kind of go for it because we're thinking we can bleed Russia dry, kind of similar to like Afghanistan bled us dry. And, you know, we are quite literally using them as human meat shields, and it's not good. If we actually cared about them, we'd be advocating for peace. We'd be acknowledging that the Azov Battalion is a provocateur in the area and a bad actor, and we'd be acknowledging how we have provoked Russia in these ways and amplified the situation. So Mark Hamill doesn't actually care, whether it's out of ignorance or out of malice. I'm not sure, but the fact that he doesn't grapple with the image and the flag and what it represents just demonstrates that.
Yeah, his take here strikes me as the kind of response where, you might bring up the recent leaks that happened where it shows, oh, look, Zelensky, it seems like he's been embezzling like up to like $400,000 of
Oh
the
man.
US aid, and like, oh, the Russian strength is way 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 better than what the US was reporting it would be, which, anyone with a brain could have told you. What do you think about these things? I have no idea. I'm just supporting Ukraine over Russia. It's like, okay, look, dude, maybe take a step back. I mean, he could have even said, look, I don't. He didn't even need to say I have no idea what that flag signifies. He could say something like, look, maybe not every, like, I'm not equipped to say one way or the other that every group over there is to my personal taste or not. I support Ukrainians who are losing they're losing their homes. I support Ukraine's sovereign right to exist, and I don't like that Russia is invaded. You could make broad principled statements because, like, really, it's pretty easy to do that. But he clearly is bothered by the fact that people are actually asking him to be accountable to something and doesn't know how to respond. So, it's like when someone when I say, like, I'm skeptical about this, and they say, well, look, like, Putin did X, Y, and Z, or Russia did X, Y, and Z, and that's terrible. Or don't Ukrainians have a right to defend their homes? I can answer pretty confidently because I know my position. Yes, Ukrainians do have a right to defend their home. Yes, Vladimir Putin is a thug, and they're both, his invasion is a bad action. But there's also more to the picture here than just those individual facts. And when you look at the whole context, you have to evaluate where your positions are on things in light of the bigger picture. So, if Mark Hamill still wants to support Ukraine and say, look, the Azov Battalion isn't all of Ukraine, that would be a fine position
Yeah.
to take. But he doesn't even do that. He just shows that he's ignorant. He's just going with what the popular thing is. His speaking out is no better than just putting a stupid Ukrainian flag emoji in your name.
Yeah, it, it's the motivations of these people is really revealed through their ignorance, right? And because, like I was saying, if he knew what Azov Battalion was, if he actually cared about Ukraine and these people, like, you can make that point, right? Like, oh, I don't care if the Azov Battalion is there. Like, I just care that the Ukrainians like have a right to defend their homeland and stuff, and that's not all of Ukraine. All the stuff that you're saying, even if you make that argument, which I think is the strongest argument that he could have made, you still have to grapple with the fact is like, well, do you want peace in the area?
Right.
It's like, okay, well, if you want peace in the area, then you need to understand the history and why people are doing what they're doing, right? That's essential to any sort of resolution, is to understanding the motivations. And Azov Battalion happens to be part of it, and his argument would just crumble there, right? There's no good answer to why you are supporting and putting out these types of images and they want them to like fight to the death or something over there. It's like that. It's just the weirdest dichotomy of like, well, we need to be humanitarians and care about Ukraine, and also they need to fight to the last man standing over there in a war that they clearly cannot win, and we cannot continue to support. I mean, I don't know if you saw in some of those documents, but there's like talk of Zelensky doing a strike within Russia using U.S. military ordnance. Stuff like
Mhm.
that is just dangerous and unwise and reckless. And uh, yeah, it just needs to end. And people like Mark Hamill are not. They're just amping it up. They are warmongers, even though they have the fake guise of a humanitarian.
But don't worry, I'm sure he will get very upset if any politician that he disagrees with has like, I don't know, oh, let's say a Confederate flag in the background.
Sure.
I'm sure he'll fly off the handle about that. But Azov Battalion in the background, hey, he doesn't know what it means. All he cares about is supporting current thing.
Yeah. NPC Mark Hamill. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. I mean, he had some pretty good sensibilities about The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. I wish that translated both to that. Like they listened to him as well as to wisdom about the Ukrainian conflict. But
He
alas,
should
Master
probably stay.
misses.
Yeah, I should probably stay within galactic conflict, not so much
Yeah.
interplanetary United States,
You know,
Russia, and Ukraine conflict.
you know, yep, in a European country far, far away.
Yeah.
That should not matter to us. All right, folks. Well, that's our last one for this show. We really appreciate you hanging out. Again, leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, and we'll catch you on the next one.